The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of KSMQ Public Service Media Incorporated or its assigns.
Welcome to Garden Connections. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. But we love to get our hands dirty on this show, and today is no exception. We are going to play with worms today. We're at ProVital in Spring Valley, Minnesota, and we're going to learn all about worm castings and the great things that worms do for our gardens. We'll also hear from Aimee Whiteaker, who's going to be answering your tough gardening questions. And we'll be back in our very own community garden plot, and Gail Porter is going to be joining us. She is a longtime gardener, and she's going to give us some great advice. I hope you'll stay with us. Well, today we're in Spring Valley and we're here at ProVital and we're going to learn all about worms, and we're with Neil Moeller. Neil, tell us about worms, and sometimes people refer to them as worm castings, worm manure, worm compost, vermicompost. There are a lot of different terms used. Do they mean all the same thing, and what exactly are you doing here?
Well, it's all the same kind of idea. I mean, essentially what you have with composting is the process of the worm breaking down organic material. Okay. What we're doing here is it's basically a more, I wouldn't say industrialized, but it's a more simplified process, okay? And it's a more streamlined process than what you would do at your house.
And the end result is what?
What you end up with is you get the pure form of castings, or the worm byproduct.
What exactly do you use the worm castings for?
It can be used for a number of different things, mostly for, additives in plants and trying to help out the plant in some way, but then also, again, giving good things back into the soil, allowing the soil to rebuild itself.
Great. So you start with worms, and we'll start with your process here in just a minute, but is there a special kind of worm that you need to use to get this process going? Are some breeds of worms better than others? Yeah,
and there's usually 3 types of worms that typically get associated with vermicomposting or the creation of vermicasting. What we use is an African nightcrawler. The reason being is that they're more of an active worm. They typically are going to produce a better product in the end. The other 2 are red wigglers and then the European nightcrawler.
Let's take a look at some of these guys. Let's see if we can find some in here.
Absolutely.
Oh, here's one.
Yep.
He looks like he's asleep.
Yeah. And again, these guys have been in here for about 2/3 of what the actual time is. So
and they're different sizes too.
Yep. So you can kind of see the size here. So these guys have been going for, I would say, probably half a year. So you can kind of see the size here. They start out, very small, and these guys have been growing to about what they get to. They get a little bit bigger, but again, this is kind of what you would consider an adult.
An adult size.
Yep.
And about how many of these guys would we find in a bucket this
So
big?
in this style bucket, based on the production that we like to use, there's typically going to be between 200 and 300. We get really...
In one bucket?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So again, it's measuring out what the worm can eat versus the time that they're in there, and making sure that you're getting a pure product in the end.
In the end.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's take a look at how this product works. We'll tuck these guys back in.
Yeah.
And let's start with an empty bucket.
Okay.
It's about, what, 10 inches deep?
Yep, so this is a 2.5 gallon pail roughly, okay? Up to the holes where they get, some of the airflow in.
And is that what these holes are for?
Yeah,
just
absolutely, because it's almost like an effect of a terrarium kind of idea where you're covering this up and you're allowing the airflow through.
Okay, so you will eventually put a lid on this.
Yep, and you want to keep the moisture in. That's kind of the big deal. That's why you put the lid up, but you still have the breathing holes.
Breathing holes. Okay. What goes in the bucket?
Okay, so what we put in the bucket is we have just a peat soil that we use.
And that's this?
Again, like I said, we try to get that locally. We actually get that one in Austin. So, but that's just a pure peat soil. Again, just broken down organic matter.
It's pretty and black.
It is
very
black.
nice.
Very nice.
Whole bucket in there?
Yep, it's a little full, but you can kind of put it in there.
Maybe about half or so.
Yep. Yep. So what we do is we try to fill it up. We can put it all in as long as we kind of showing the whole idea here.
Okay.
And about to there.
Okay.
And you can kind of see here that what you're ending up with. Okay. And there's some clumps, and we would pulverize this in the actual process, so it's a little bit fluffier when we do it, but.
Yeah, but it breaks apart.
It's the same idea.
Really easily.
And it's got a good moisture to it. We do have to kind of watch the moisture level on this. So what we do is we'll put in this soil, and then what we actually use is we use a mixing process to put in our feed, and it's It's a proprietary system that we use, and we use a kind of a few different additives that we like that we feel like are really helping the worm, and then also helping out the end product.
So it's not like you're taking leaves and grass clippings. You actually have, and this is it, right?
Yeah, this is it. And you can actually do, you know, those things. That's the normal, what you would consider as a vermicomposting, which, you know, again, you're still going to be getting a good product
Looks
with.
like chicken feed a little bit.
It's very ground up really fine so that the worm can eat through it real easy. And one of the things that we try to emphasize is, you know, non-genetically modified feed and making sure it doesn't have any antibiotics in it, things like that. Again, so that's kind of what we're trying to do with our feed, and just making sure that what's going through the worm and what's coming out is, you know, we know where that came from.
Where it came from. And so you put this in with your peat?
Yep. So we'd actually mix this up in a mixing process along with our pulverizing. Yep.
So we'll be the mixing machine here.
Yep.
All right, so you put the feed in.
Yep.
Okay, and so the worms go in next. You don't have to add water.
Nope. Yeah, it's it. We've actually already checked the moisture level on the water. We don't, or on the soil. We don't have to worry about what the moisture level is when we're putting it in.
Okay.
Yep.
Worms go in. You just dump them on the top, or do you tumble them in a little bit?
No,
too?
you actually just put them into the top because you don't want to really agitate them. You want to kind of just let them do their own thing, and eventually they'll just come down. You know, and usually the soil might be a little bit dirt or a little bit cold, so that they kind of take a little bit of time for it to get to room temperature, and then they kind of burrow.
And then they feel more comfortable getting in.
Exactly.
All right, kind of like a pool.
Yep.
Then you cover it up, and you've got a special place that you keep these. Tell us about that structure.
So what we've done is we've actually taken a shipping container and insulated it, and we keep that container at 77 degrees, and actually that's just more of what we're thinking. Again, 70 and up for this particular worm is fine.
Yep.
But we kind of keep it there, and we basically just leave them in there for the amount of time that we've established, and let them do their thing.
Boards over the top?
Yep, we put the boards over the top. Again, that's to keep the moisture in, but still let it breathe.
You have lights on?
Yeah, we have lights on. What that does is so the worm doesn't come up and say, oh, well, I'm going to move to the next, we're all done here. And then they get out, and then they'll, you know, obviously dry up because they have no moisture.
Right.
So we want to stay away from that. We want to keep our
that
guys.
Seems counterintuitive almost, that worms like the dark and that you should have the lights out, but, lights are
again,
on.
and it's not, it doesn't hurt them in any way or anything like that. It just, you know, they get up there and they say, oh, it's bright out, let's burrow back in.
And how long do you kind of, you don't cook them, but how long do they sit?
And essentially, what we're doing now is it's usually a 2-week process. It depends, you know. Sometimes we'll kind of fluctuate a little bit, but yeah, 2 weeks is typically what we're doing for our process.
And then those 200 to 300 worms have eaten through the entire bucket.
Yep, they've eaten through it, and they've typically reproduced. And so they've done that. So then we actually get what's called a cocoon, which then holds the baby worms.
Right. Okay. Then you dump it into some of your sorting machines, and tell us about what happens with some of this equipment.
So what the sorting machine does is it sorts out the actual byproduct, the casting that we showed before, and then it also sorts out the cocoons, and then it sorts out the worm. So the casting is actually what you can then utilize for your plants and things like that. And then the cocoons you can actually hatch again, you can grow more worms.
So you can grow more worms?
Yep, and then the worms you just put back in.
You can use them over and over again.
Exactly.
How long is the life cycle of a worm? How often can you keep reusing them?
It's, you know, variable, but, you know, I would say roughly 2 years, and then you start to kind of think about, yep. And again, they'll kind of, their production level will go down, and, you know, they'll get really big, and we have some that are getting up there in age, and, you know, then you kind of think about, okay, well, what can we do with them? Then you've got
bait worms.
Yeah, then you got bait worms, essentially. Yep.
So when this process is done, let's take a look at what these puppies look like.
So this is the actual casting product. So this is the byproduct. You can see it's very nice and black. They're like,
it's drier.
Yep, it's drier. The moisture is actually contained inside of it. Okay, it's like a pellet almost, and that's what it looks like.
And you don't do anything else to this? This is what you bag up?
This is it. Yep.
And so for gardeners who have worms in their garden, I mean, do we consider that a good sign? When I'm in the garden, I always, you know, if I'm digging around and I see lots of worms, I think, oh, this is a great deal. Yeah. True?
Well, the worms are great because, you know, they're decomposing all that organic matter that's in there, so they're helping out the plant. They're never going to hurt anything per se. You know, again, they're aerating the soil, and yes, as long as you see worms in there, it's probably an indicator that your soil is good.
Is healthy.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And when you have this material at the end, gardeners can use this as simply sprinkle around your plants. How is something like this utilized? I mean, this concentrated worm casting.
Yeah, well, there's a couple different ways that you can use it. Some things you can just put it right on, like you said, like a top dress.
So when you apply this to the garden, to a plant, you know, this is kind of about a cup. Is that enough per plant, or what kind of quantities are we talking about? Are we talking about 50-pound bags?
Well, yeah, and it all just depends on what you're planting it with and what you're putting it into. You know, if you think about a house plant, you know, yeah, you could put in a cup or half a cup and be good for a few weeks. You know, I mean, I would say 8 weeks you'd probably be good, and you'd see some results.
And then it'll kind of decompose
Yep.
into the soil.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you would probably want to reapply after that. Now, as far as like if you're gardening or something and you're putting it into your rows or into your underneath your plants when you're transplanting, you know, then you probably want to give a little bit more. You also want to think about too is like if it's a garden and you're utilizing, you know, that full area. Usually what we say is do it by volume, figure out the volume of your bed or whatever you have your plants in, and then take 20% of that and actually utilize worm castings at a 20% to 80% soil.
Great. Well, this is wonderful looking stuff that folks can put in their garden to just give those plants an extra boost.
Yep.
Interesting stuff, and there's no odor to this. It doesn't smell.
Yeah, that's actually one of the attributes that people really like about this is it doesn't have any odor to it. It just smells like good dirt.
Excellent. Neil, thank you so much for explaining to us what these worms do at your place.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, hang with us. We are going to next hear from Aimee, who's going to answer some of your tough gardening questions.
Hi, I'm Aimee, and I'm glad to be here to share my knowledge and expertise answering your garden questions. Today, we have a couple of questions that have been submitted by local gardeners. The first is regarding volunteer plants. I noticed volunteers coming up from my last year's garden: onions, leeks, kale, Brussels sprouts, etc. Should I keep them? I tried that with carrot volunteers one year and they never made decent carrots. They just went to seed. I know how exciting it can be to see plants coming up in your garden before you've even had the chance to get out there and work the ground and plant things yourself. But there are a few things we need to consider when plants volunteer. The first thing is some plants, especially vegetable plants, are what are called biennial, meaning that the first year they put all of their energy into creating a nice big root like carrots or beets. And the second year they put all of their energy into producing flowers and seeds. So the first year when we harvest them, they are providing our vegetables. Whereas the second year, if we leave them go, all of that root has shrunken down so that all of that energy has been transferred up into the flowers and seeds. That is why there is nothing good on them to eat the second year. So if it is a biennial crop, chances are you're not going to want to keep those volunteers. The other thing to consider is cross-pollination. When the parent plants get pollinated and the seed falls to the ground, there are times when the plant that comes up will be the same as the parent plant, and there are times that it will be very, very different from the parent plant. These are times when you might want to consider transplanting those plants into a different area of the garden and just watch and see what happens with them. If they come up true to form and are like the parent plants and you like the vegetables that they produce, go ahead and keep them. But if not, you can dispose of them and again start fresh. The second question we are going to look at today is about lettuce. It simply says, last summer my lettuce turned bitter. What happened? There are some crops that prefer to grow at cooler temperatures and lower light conditions. Lettuce is one of them. It allows the plants to put more energy into the leaf production, which is the part that we eat, before going into seed production. Now, when lettuce goes into seed production, it creates latex in the leaves, which is actually a really, really bitter sap, and that's what causes the lettuce to become bitter. If you can keep the lettuce cool and keep the light conditions low, it will continue to produce leaves and it won't go to seed, which will keep it from getting bitter. The best times to grow lettuce are in early spring and early summer when the days are short and cool, and also in the fall when things again begin to cool down and the days shorten.
Porter and her husband live here in Austin, and they have been community gardeners since the early 1990s. Gail recently joined us to share some helpful hints on what it's like to garden out at the community garden plots. Gail, you and your husband have been out here at the community gardens for some time. Right. What made you decide to have a garden plot out here?
We've always had a garden where we've lived before, so when we moved to town, we were looking into where they had community gardens and found this, and it's been fun since we've started that.
And you've been out here since when?
1990.
To 1990, so you're going on your 22nd season?
Right.
And tell us, what's it like to be part of a community garden? Because I'm sure it's different than gardening in your own backyard.
It is. You have a lot of people around, a lot of people that you can talk with, kind of getting ideas from them.
And do you find that a lot of people do kind of peek over the fence, as it were? There's no fences out here, but kind of look into one another's plots and what are you growing and how does that work?
Right. It is kind of fun, you know, to see the different kinds of things and the different nationalities too. You know, what they grow and what are you using that for, and even some of the better gardeners, you know, they have nice, beautiful plants. Well, how are you doing that? You know, give us some tips.
Well, as you can see, we've gotten started here in our garden plot, and today we're ready to put in our cauliflower and our broccoli and show folks what a row cover looks like. Okay. Will you help us with that?
Sure.
All right, sounds good. Let's get started. So we're going to put in our broccoli and our cauliflower. We're going to put them into row 2, and I've loosened the dirt up here a little bit so it makes it a little bit easier to work with. How is your dirt in your section? And do you find it be pretty consistent around the garden? We kind of feel like ours is a little hard, and maybe that's because it was in a newly plowed section.
And that could be too. They added this area just recently, past couple of years, but otherwise they come through and they till it and to get it worked up. And then, like us, some other people will come through and then they till it themselves.
Till it again, okay.
So it's really kind of
we'll keep that in mind for next year.
Okay.
Sounds good. Well, we have 4 cauliflower and 4 broccoli to put in this 10-foot space. And I brought our map so we make sure we have it in the right place. And I also brought a little measuring tool, and it's definitely nothing fancy. It's an old tape measure of my husband's that broke, and I said I'll take that section because it is about 30 inches and there isn't anything I plant any further apart than that. Right. So we'll spread these 4 plants out in each 5-foot section. And what we're also going to do is amend the soil a little bit, since it is a little bit stiffer and we didn't do a double till, with some worm castings that we picked up earlier today.
Okay.
All right, let's get started. So what are some of your favorite things to grow in your garden, Gail?
I like just the basic vegetables, beans, peas, and I also like a lot of squash.
Mostly winter squash, or do you eat a lot of zucchini too?
Well, it's the yellow crooknecks and the winter squash too.
Yep, those are good.
Yeah.
There we go. Looks good.
Good.
Well, one of the things that I like to do is in my garden, a lot of times row covers are used for frost protection early in the spring, and we do have an early season this year.
Right.
So the threat of frost is still with us at this point. But the other thing, I find it really useful to keep away some bugs that like to chew on your stuff.
Right.
Or in the case of our garden, there's always rabbits.
Oh,
and
exactly.
I have lost newly planted transplants to rabbits overnight. So if you'll give me a hand, we'll demonstrate how to put on a row cover.
Okay, sounds good.
So the first thing we need to do for putting on a row cover is to give a little structure so that the cloth doesn't lay directly on the plants. Sometimes that's okay with a quick cover if you're going to run out and cover them if there's a frost coming, but for our case, for our purposes, it's going to stay on there. So we want to put a little structure underneath, and what I have done in my own garden is I have just taken some wire that I use to build a high tensile fence for my cattle, and I just snipped it into smaller lengths. And so what I'm going to do is just take and make a little loop right over the row. And these will work for a little while. When the plants get taller, as broccoli and cauliflower will, you can either cut new lengths that are taller, or you can remove them if you think the threat of the rabbits or whatever we're trying to prevent is gone. So you have a few, I have a few. Let's go ahead and lay those out.
Okay.
And then we'll put the row cover on top.
Okay.
So we have this lovely white spun kind of cloth that goes over it that lets light through. You can see that it's translucent, so it lets the light through, but it keeps things like bugs and also provides a few degrees temperature protection for the frost. So you attach it to the ground. You can do it a couple of ways. They have little plastic pins that you can stick in the ground. But I find if your soil gets dry, these tend to pull out if it's a windy day. So you also can use rocks.
That will hold it down.
Rocks will hold it very well, and my farm happens to have a lot of these, so I use a lot of rocks to weight it down. But I'll give you a couple of these just to pin the edges while we secure the rest. And so do you need a little more room over there?
Well, I have enough.
You've got plenty? Okay.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and pin that center one. And as you can see, this is well wider than the row. So sometimes I just tuck it up until my plants grow, and then you'll need all that height to get them covered. And these pins push through a couple layers of fabric pretty easily.
Yeah.
Okay, all the way in. Great, and then let's get some rocks and weight down the sides so that the wind doesn't pick it up and take it. And I usually find weighting it by the supports works pretty effectively.
Okay.
And I'll trim off the end since we're a little long here. Got another rock in there?
I think so.
A couple. I'll put one on, kind of on the center in the end. Kind of looks like a long white caterpillar.
It does.
And that should do the job to keep out any critters and also provide a little bit of frost protection while we're still in the early spring. So the next thing we wanted to accomplish today was to plant some herbs.
That'll be fun.
All right, let's do it. Well, now it's time to fill in this section. We're going to do it with herbs and celery, which isn't technically an herb, but I use it a ton in cooking, as much as I use any of my other herbs. So we're going to put some in this garden. So why don't you start on that end? I'll start on this end. We'll meet in the middle. And I believe you're going to start with some cilantro. Is that right, Gail?
Correct.
Do you use herbs a lot when you're cooking?
When we grow them out here, then we like to dry them and then use them in cooking.
You dry them, okay.
Yeah.
And what do you typically plant in your section?
We've done chives, we've done the cilantro, dill. We do a lot of that.
And you were telling me dill grows like a weed out here.
Yeah, if you change the gardens and someone's grown it the year before, you always are guaranteed that you're going to have dill growing up wherever.
Some of it again. Well, that's good. I haven't had much luck with that at home. And cilantro is a nice, bright, fresh herb. What do you make with that?
We use it for salsas.
Oh, okay. You have a secret salsa recipe?
Oh, my son does.
Okay. We'll have to see if we can convince him to share it with us.
That's right.
And what's your next one there?
This is sage, tricolor sage.
Oh, look at the stems are purple.
They are.
And the leaves are two-toned. There's a creamy white and a green. Oh, that looks interesting.
Pretty.
That is pretty. And when you dry your herbs, how long do you have to leave them? Do you set them out or do you dry them in the oven?
I hang them and let them dry upside down.
In a dark place, or can you do it just in the kitchen?
I've done it in the kitchen.
And about how long does that take?
It takes a couple of weeks. They're pretty good.
These roots look great. Look at how crazy they are.
Yes.
That looks very healthy. Okay, and now I'm into the dill. So let's hope this takes off just like you said. And you've got what's left there?
This is oregano.
Oregano. I love that too. I have had a really tough time getting that started. Have you ever started oregano from seed?
No, just because it is hard.
Seems to take forever to germinate. And you said you do grow dill?
I do.
You
If
do.
it doesn't come up.
Do you make pickles then?
Well, I like to add it. I don't make pickles, but when I do a cucumber salad, then I add that.
Oh, that sounds good. You'll have to share that recipe with us too.
Okay.
All right, it's looking good. Well, Gail, thank you so much for helping us out today and telling us about the community garden, giving us some helpful hints on how to learn from our neighbors, and we look forward to seeing you in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Well, I hope you have enjoyed our show today, and I hope you'll join us again next week where we start out with a conversation about how to garden with straw bales. I'm your host, Stephanie Passingham. On Garden Connections, we'd love to see photos of your garden. Or if you have questions for our garden experts, contact us by emailing garden@ksmq.org or like us on Facebook.